Wow. Hello, everyone. I see so many people in this event. I've been following the sessions as well. So much great content. But I'm sure that the best is yet to come. So, hello, everyone. My name is Yamini Bangarusamy. I am the community specialist over here at Fairygodboss, and I'm very excited to be hosting this fireside chat. Our special guest today knows how to lead through change, build strong teams, and make work more meaningful. Ebony Beckwith is the founder of Framework, helping executives and organizations decode corporate culture for success. Former Salesforce executive, she's a respected leader with sharp business insights and a deep commitment to people. So please join me in welcoming Ebony Beckwith.
Thank you so much, Yamini. It's really wonderful to be here.
Amazing. So we have a slate of questions to ask you. So we'll start with Ebony. Throughout your career, you've navigated leadership transitions and business shifts, evolving corporate landscapes, a whole lot of ambiguity, right? And change can be challenging at every level of an organization, top down, bottom up, what have you. But from your experience, what are the key principles that everyone, leaders, managers, employees, interns, should embrace to navigate change effectively? And how might those principles shift depending on your role?
Great question. Yeah, I'm pretty old, so I've been through my fair share of change throughout my career over two and a half decades. Yeah, 2.5 decades. So earlier in my career, one of the companies that I worked at went through a lot of change, multiple rounds of layoffs. We switched technology platforms, application vendors. Sometimes I just felt like the change would never end. And now, just like reading the news, it just feels like the same thing is happening, like AI and all this. Like it's just a lot, right? It's just a lot of change. And so, you know, I had to learn how to embrace change with grace instead of anger. When I was younger, it just used to frustrate me. I just something popped into my head when my manager used to redline presentations that I would give her. I would be so pissed. I'd be like, I worked hard on that. Why are you changing it? This is perfection. But then I was like, oh, it's fine. She's just helping me grow. But now I think that my biggest unlock is realizing that change isn't disruption. It's just a normal part of growth. And I think what matters is how we respond to that change. And so now my go-to principles are these: stay curious, ask better questions. How does this really impact me? What does this change make possible? Over communicate, especially for leaders, making sure that we are imparting clarity to our people. And I think, like the Brene Brown principle, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. One of my team members really helped me to lean into that. And I think for employees, this one is really key. Don't wait to be told. Employees can lean in really early and help facilitate this change for folks. Ask how you can help shape the transition. And that, I think, is a real boss move for folks, regardless of what level you're at. And I think for managers, helping to translate the strategy, holding space for your team's reaction. I think that's really important. Don't expect for your teams to understand like how this change is, because a lot of times as leaders, we've been formulating the change for weeks, months, quarters out, and then we just drop a change on our folks. We've been discussing it for a long time, and they don't have all the answers yet. They're still like trying to understand what's going on. So really helping them to understand what's going on. And then as leaders, really making sure that we model calm and not certainty all the time. People don't expect us to have every single answer, but they do need to trust our process. And I think that they deserve honesty from us. I can't tell you how many times I've had to tell my team, I don't know all the answers yet, but what I can tell you is this. And I find that this level of communication really goes a long way when I'm honest with them, even when I don't have all the answers. So that's how I really embrace change.
I really love that. I think that's a very empathetic approach, and you're thinking about change not as how it affects you, but also those around you, and really making sure that if you can ease that process for them, then they'll just be that much more inclined to be on your team, right? Have your back.
Yeah. And I
Love
think
it.
it, different at different levels and of where you are in the organization, you have different responses and different responsibility to hold that change.
Absolutely. And Ebony, you've said that your first boss move started with a small step. And I don't know, some might think that's an oxymoron, boss move, small step. What do you mean? But can you share a story about a time earlier in your career when you made a bold choice that didn't feel bold at the time, but just changed the game for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the boldest moves I ever made didn't feel bold at all. It felt like survival, really. Um, when I was just getting started and trying to break into technology, there was an opening at in a graveyard shift. And so that was like midnight to like 7, 8 a.m. And I took it, even though most people thought I was making a bad decision. Some people thought it wasn't safe. Some people thought it wasn't the most strategic job that I could take. But it was something for me. I thought that there was going to be room for me to grow, and it was getting me closer to the department I wanted to be in. So while everyone else slept, I was learning, and I documented the processes for that organization. I covered people's shifts. I was building a binder that became the go-to process binder for other resources in other parts of the organization and other shifts for them to use. And so I made myself valuable when no one else was watching. And that decision was a huge shift for me. It ended up being a power move that got me promoted from graveyard to swing shift to day shift. And it really set me up to be a leader. And that was my path to leadership. And so sometimes I think the boldest step isn't the loudest step, it's just an intentional a step that you make. So you don't always need like this spotlight to make, a bold move. Sometimes you just need, for me, it was a binder. And I love binders. I love stationery and all those things. So a binder, it was a binder, a grit, and just taking the long view.
I love it. I love it. And Ebony, you've led at the highest levels, right, and helped really shape major business strategies. What do you think separates a good leader from a truly great one, right? Especially when it comes to making these tough decisions, these tough calls. What really decides who's good, who's great?
I think good leaders get things done. Great leaders grow people while they're getting things done. And I think that difference or that distinction really shows up in those really tough moments. And great leaders don't just make the calls and just move on. They really bring their people with them. They explain the why, they give the context, even when it's uncomfortable, even when they just want to go back into their office, shut the door, and be like, they'll understand later. They've used those moments to teach and not just be like, you do this and you do that. There's a lot of command and control. I used to have a leader who was like, kind of a soldier mentality. And those days are gone now. That is not the context we live in. And I'll be honest, I haven't always gotten that right. Early in my leadership journey, I had to make some tough calls with no context, just execution. And I saw how that created frustration or confusion, even though the decision was like technically correct. It took some time, it took practice, it took the frustration, it took my team calling me out. It took that feedback, but that's what made me grow. Um, but what I know now is that leadership is a skill that you can develop. I think that clarity, compassion, communication, they're like muscles, You can build them by showing up, getting it wrong sometimes, and trying again. And that's the beauty of it. The best leaders are not perfect. I think when you see people at certain levels and you see them getting it right, you see them on stages, you see them in fireside chats, you see them showing up and doing these great things, you go, gosh, they just get it naturally. And that is not the case at all. They've gotten the hard feedback. They have the mentors, they have the coaches, they have the bosses. They're like, you got this wrong, do better. They have this circle of people around them, helping them grow. And I'm so grateful for the people in my life and my professional career who've helped me do that, because leadership isn't about being right. It's about making the right decision and leaving your team more confident and more informed and more resilient on the other side, and then still continuing to grow yourself as things evolve, right? There are new things changing all around us. So it requires I think the best leaders are those who are willing to grow and stretch, and again, bring their teams along with them.
I really like that. I think leaders as well are also living for the first time, right? So no one is born a perfect leader, as you said. You're very imperfect, but you're open to changing your approach, your strategy as your
Yeah.
teams see fit. So I like that. And
Living for the
yeah,
first time. I love that. I'm stealing that, girl.
royalties, please. But what does the next generation of leadership look like? I feel like we're always on the cusp of some sort of change. AI, ML, like we have so much. And then we also just have this new generation of potential leaders, especially women and underrepresented groups that are coming up. And what does leadership look like for them? What new skills are critical to them in the next decade or so?
I also love what someone just said. Great leadership is truly a blessing. And I just want to plus one on that real quick, too. So, the next generation of leadership, I really, I love leading into this concept of decoding, and that's what my passion is just decoding corporate America, decoding all this complexity. So I think this next generation of leadership will be defined by the ability to decode complexity, not just in systems or data, but in people, power dynamics, and culture. So especially for women and underrepresented leadership leaders, this preparation isn't about performance necessarily, but about teaching them how to navigate the structures that weren't necessarily built for us, right? Um, and I think that's key. It means for me, I just love this. I love teaching people how to read rooms. And I think it's so important. We have to do it with intention. And then making sure we don't shrink back. I think, I want to talk about, I want to make sure we talk about this. Um, a lot of As women, I think historically we've been taught to shrink back or hide who we are or fit in, and we can't do that. Part of decoding is learning how to own our own space. And so we have to stop asking future leaders to fit outdated modes or models, and we need leaders who know how to create culture and create clarity in this kind of uncertainty that we're living in now, because there's a lot of it. And we need leaders who know how to build trust across all this difference that's been created, and who can lead teams in a way that feel grounded and forward looking at the same time. Because people want leaders who lead from trust and from certainty. And the best leaders from the future will be able to do that in a way that's both strategic and humane. And I think that'll be really important for future leaders.
I like that. I like that. Take up your space, right?
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
shrink. I love that.
Hmm.
And Ebony, you've navigated very big career shifts, and now you help others do the same. But how can professionals, at any stage, take more agency in their careers and make bold, intentional choices? Especially at Fairygodboss, where I help manage the community, we see a lot of community members kind of hesitate to make the leap, right? Whether it's because they are trying to get into a brand new industry that they've never been in before, or they feel like their age perhaps is a drawback.
Mm,
So there's a lot of ambiguity
mm,
already, and then throw in some demographic factors into the mix. People
mhm,
don't know how to make those bold choices, those intentional
mhm,
moves. How can you do that?
mhm. Well, I'm 48 and I just made a major change. It was scary. Um, and so I'll tell you, should not be a factor. And I think that agency starts when you stop waiting for clarity to come from someone else. And you don't necessarily need a roadmap to take a bold step, because I think what we need is that moment of clarity and honesty when we stop saying, like, what do they want from me? And like, what? And for me, it was like, oh, what's my LinkedIn profile gonna look like? And what are they gonna say? My old professional, my old people, my old job, you know. And I started saying to myself, like, what do I want, right? What do I want for myself? What do I love? There's someone, the person who does my marketing, my branding, she's like, what do you love? And that's a question she asked me maybe like a few weeks ago. And I was like, that's such a good question. What do I love? What do I want? Because the truth is, most of us are taught to wait, to be tapped, to be noticed, to be promoted. And most of the bold moves that I've ever made don't come from being picked. They came from when I decided, right? So taking agency doesn't necessarily mean you knew exactly what was going on or where we were going. It just means you're just willing to move. And I find that once I get into momentum, my friends and I always talk, like, just keep moving, like, just to stay in motion, right? So my advice is, don't wait for that perfect timing or for permission. Just get clear on what matters to you and start aligning your choices with that. And even a small step, when it's intentional, is a very bold move. I think a lot of people think that, like, you have to take some big leap. And in my opinion, a big leap when you don't know what you're doing is actually foolish. It is unwise. So a baby step, a micro step in the right direction with something that your heart is calling you to do is extremely brave. And so take that step and just keep going. And then ultimately you'll be right where you want to be.
I love that, and I think really throughout your session, Ebony, I'm sure people were expecting, very bold, crazy pieces of advice, like just quit your job right now and start a business. And
No.
that's what I was thinking too. But coming in, I'm just like, no. Ebony is saying, calm down, first of all, right? Think about it. Think
Yes.
about what you're going to do. Take small steps. It might not even seem like a boss step for you at this point in time,
No.
but later on down the line, you'll notice that it was. So I'm seeing so much organic advice from you that's like
You
not
got
go
it.
big, go bold, but more so just do something, see how it pans out. If it doesn't work, course correct. And that's very calming to me because I always feel like if we're not going out in, I don't know, just all out in flying colors, then I'm doing something wrong. But you're telling me that's not how it needs to be.
Grounded, strategic, calm, centered. Yep.
Very
And
centered.
then when you look back, it'll seem like it was huge, right? In retrospect, people think it'll like it was some huge step, but it wasn't. It was one little thing at a time. Yeah.
I love that. That's very reassuring, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So AI and automation, we kind of keep coming back to this throughout the summit
Mhm.
because it's just
Mhm.
a force to be reckoned with. It's not going away anytime soon. So they are reshaping industries. All the new developments in technology. What should employees focus on now to really future-proof their careers?
Three S's: skills, storytelling, self awareness. So let's start with the first one: skills. Learn how to learn. It reminds me of my elementary school days. They were really focused on teaching us girls, I went to an all girls school, how to learn and to learn to love learning. And I would say once you've mastered that, um, um, you got to keep learning, keep learning some more. I love learning as much as I love napping. I love to say, people know I love to nap. Good restorative nap. But AI tools are evolving so quickly, but adaptability never goes out of style. So you just got to stay adaptable, right? Once you learn something else. And then storytelling. If you can connect the dots between what you bring, your technology skills, your teams, and your outcomes, you'll always be valuable. So you gotta learn how to tell your story. And then self-awareness. You should know what you and only you can bring to the table. And I think that's so important. So maybe it's creativity, maybe it's great judgment, empathy. For me, it's the sparkle. What can AI not replicate, right? And I think the future isn't so much about competing with AI, it's about doubling down on what makes you human. And the more you know your unique value, the harder it'll be to replace you. And again, you have to tell that story. AI is not going to tell that story for you. Maybe AI can help you tell that story, but again, you've got to plug that algorithm in, right?
Yeah, to make AI your personal assistant is very
Exactly.
effective, works 24/7, but not necessarily a replacement for you. I like that.
Exactly.
And I guess in the same vein of, growth and not wanting to be left behind, especially in high growth environments, what's, the one mindset shift that
Mhm.
separates people who scale with the business as it grows versus those that kind of get stuck when
Mm.
the business starts to really grow and kind of grows beyond them, if you will.
Yeah, business is changing so fast, and it's changing and scaling, and so is its complexity. The mindset shift that I would uh, advocate for is stop trying to prove like you belong and start acting like you do. Kind of like act as if. So the people who grow with business that are scaling and shifting so quickly are the ones who chuck the old playbook and the ones who can read the room. We talked about that decoding, and they adapt quickly and stay confident through uncertainty because we know that, the only constant is change, right? I've seen so many talented folks just really stall out because they were waiting for permission. They're waiting to be ready, for someone to notice them or someone to promote them or, check every single box. I heard a little bit of that theme in the last session, right? But the playbook doesn't even apply anymore, right? Some of the old rules have gone out the window. But in high growth environments, the game changes every single quarter, right? And so I think readiness is kind of becoming a myth in high growth environments. So the job is evolving faster than your job description can keep up. I mean, the job description that I started with is not the job that I even had, And I think most people get stuck in this is not my job description. I'd be like, your job description is not applicable, right? And so if you cannot get that concept out of your head, it's like, but this is not the job I was hired for. And I'm like, well, just do that job then. Do whatever job that makes you indispensable, right? And so I think people get like stuck in that. So just be ready to evolve, right? Be ready to keep learning, be adaptable. I may not know all the answers, but I know how to figure them out. That is the mindset that I want people to have. That curiosity, that adaptability, that confidence that I will figure the darn thing out. That will carry you farther than any outdated job description will. So that's what I want people to have.
Amazing. Be like water, right? Ready
Right,
to really
right.
adapt. Like that.
Exactly, and just flow.
And just flow. I was gonna say that next, darn it.
We're on the same wavelength.
We're
We got
on
a
the
whole
same
water going.
we do, on the same wave.
Be
But no,
ready
I
to
was
keep learning. I love this. Be ready to
yeah,
keep learning, living, learning.
living and
Yes.
learning. I love that. And, thinking about what you just said, I thought about, success as being like an individual achievement, right? And you said work outside job description, we talked about being flexible, be like water, get into flow state. All that is very cool. But then I've also realized that throughout my career, and I'm sure everyone's career, it's very much it takes a village.
Mm.
right, to have a great career. It's about relationships and community. And we just want to know, how have strong connections shaped your journey? And how should we think about fostering real and meaningful community and networks in our workplaces?
Anyone who thinks that they were successful by themselves needs to check their big old ego at the door. Because strong connections didn't just shape my journey, they saved it, they created it. I am a product of, my parents, my teachers, all of my many connections, my bosses, like everyone, my coworkers who helped me, you know, plus, 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 right? And at every pivotal moment in my career, it wasn't just what I knew, it was who I knew and how I showed up in those relationships. And, I've learned that my network isn't just a list of contacts, right? And how many followers I had on LinkedIn. It's a living system. And like any living system, it only works if you keep it healthy, right? I've had mentors who told me hard truths, things that made me like go home and tell my mom or call my mom on the phone and be like, but she said blah, blah, blah. She was like, well, she told you the truth. I've had my mom be like, you are not ready for that type of a job and you should not even apply for that type of job. You're not ready yet. And then later she'd be like, okay, now you're ready for that type of a job. Hard truths, right? But I think that your connections are so powerful. So invest in them. And at the same time, once you're ready, then you have the responsibility and obligation to invest in others. Not because it looks good or checks some type of invisible box, because that's how real leadership works, right? And it's how actually organizations work without breaking. It's how they scale. So if you want to build meaningful relationships and meaningful connections networks, I would say start by being generous without an agenda. Don't do it because, that's how I'm going to build a powerful, LinkedIn follower base or whatever. Do it because it's the right thing to do. It's how business works. It's how to be a real leader. Two, listen more than you speak. And then three, when someone opens a door for you, don't just breeze on through it. Hold it open for someone else. Make sure you're paying it forward. And I would say that relationships aren't just a nice to have, they are that infrastructure, especially in high growth environments. And if you want to build a culture and a community, again, I do feel like it is, and I think we're all here, so I'm like preaching to the choir. This is a community. Make sure that we are making room for others.
Oh, most definitely. And, I think everyone's like professional personality, right? And how they show up at work is very different. And
Mm.
you've mentioned the importance of understanding that one's visibility is their currency, right? Make sure that you're working in public, building in public, you're growing in public, so it's available for your team and your leadership to see that you're working your tail off. Like don't do that behind closed doors. But how can visibility scale based on professional personality types, right? Just imagining that the
Mhm.
idea of being comfortable with being visible is approached differently for all of us. Some of us are more quiet, some of us are definitely more outspoken. How do we deal with this at the workplace?
So something I think most people don't expect to hear coming from me is that I'm a natural introvert, but I've learned how to be an extrovert when the moment calls for it. And I think that's the key. Visibility isn't a one size fits all thing. Um, and it doesn't mean being something you're not, right? It means finding a way to be known for what you uniquely bring to the table on your terms, right? So if you thrive on connection and presence, great. Use that. Use that energy to lead from the front, lead out loud. I have a good friend, Leah McGowan Hare. She is big and full of life. She does keynotes and she does trainings and she has a big trailblazer community and she's amazing. If you're more introverted like me, visibility might look more like crafting powerful one-on-one relationships, writing insightful keynotes and points that people remember, or speaking up strategically instead of constantly, because that drains me. But what matters is that your impact doesn't stay hidden, whatever that looks like for you, because people can't support what they don't see. So instead of asking, like, how do I, be visible, try asking, like, what version of visibility is authentic to me and how can I use that to move with purpose?
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today, Ebony.
It's
This has been
my pleasure.
phenomenal. The audience has loved you as the chat as the chat is evidence of. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been lovely. Everyone
My
out in the
pleasure.
audience, stay tuned for our next fireside chat all about building empathic companies with Marcella Sapone, the CEO at Hello Alfred. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned, and we will see you soon.